Baghdad is how most Australians are thinking.
The Prime Minister, for today at least, was staying above the fray.
Because it really is partisan domestic politics, I don't want to talk today, on this day, about the reasons behind the Cunningham by-election.
A final result for the Cunningham by-election will not be known until 6,000 postal and pre-poll votes are counted. But analysts don't expect the election night result to change.
Greens leader Bob Brown joins us now from Canberra. Good evening, Senator Brown.
Good evening, Leilene.
The Greens have won their first lower house seat. Was Cunningham fought on local issues, or does the result have national implications?
Both, but primarily on local issues and the local feeling that the big parties, not least the Labor Party, had abandoned the local populace, the local party, had overridden that from elsewhere, from Sussex Street in Sydney and elsewhere. The Howard government didn't even stand a candidate, and they were looking for a good option. And the Greens in candidate Michael Organ, who's a local man, he's steeped in the local issues, he's a good-hearted man, was that good option, and people voted for him.
You campaigned hard against Australian involvement in any war with Iraq. Was the main message here, therefore, anti-Labor or anti-war?
Look, I think it was pro-Green. As I said, a good candidate came along. There were big environmental issues, social issues, double the rate of unemployment in Cunningham that we have in the rest of the country. And Labor attacked the Greens on the environment and said, you're going to close down the steel mills and so on. The Greens, however, had a very positive package there. The locals didn't believe the Labor Party. The attack on the Greens on environmental grounds didn't work. Overarching this was concern about the war on Iraq, and many people were responding to me on my visits to Cunningham and to Michael Organ that they didn't want to see Australians sent to Iraq. They just felt both the big parties are going in the wrong direction there.
Thank you, Senator Brown.
Thanks, Leilene.
A shell-shocked Simon Crean has vowed to pull his party into line after a disastrous showing in the Cunningham by-election. As the final votes are counted, the Greens look certain to win their first ever lower house seat in federal parliament.
Greens for the Greens!
The traditional Labor heartland has thumbed its nose at the ALP.
We've been taken granted for so long, and we're going to go down Canberra and get stuck right up John Howard.
It's a victory for something that Sussex Street and the big parties have almost forgotten about.
That's right.
And that is a local representative representing people in the region as if they mattered.
The message not lost on a shell-shocked Simon Crean.
It's a big disappointment for the whole of the Labor Party. To me in particular, because I lead it.
Despite a big campaign, Labor's Sharon had to counter resentment over Stephen Martin's early resignation, which led to the by-election, and inner-party turmoil. The ALP collected 38% of the primary vote compared to the Greens' 24%, but it missed out on preferences, which pushed the Greens to a 52% lead, compared to Labor's 48% on a two-party preferred basis. The Cunningham by-election was the first major electoral test of Simon Crean's leadership, and he admits he's failed. He's confident he still has his party's support, but warns the internal disputes have got to end.
I accept the fact that this has been a defeat, and that's not nice. I don't like that. I don't like losing. But I'm going to learn from it. But the party must learn too.
Leonie Mellor, 10 News.
The Federal Labor Party has suffered a devastating blow with the loss of one of its safest strongholds. The seat of Cunningham in the Illawarra was won by the Greens in this weekend's by-election, giving that party its first ever member in the House of Representatives.
The elated Greens are calling it historic, and that's not far from the truth. No wonder they partied hard last night. In one of the biggest by-election shocks ever, their candidate, Michael Organ, snatched a heartland seat from Labor. This morning, he could hardly believe it.
I'm shocked. It's very surprising.
But the Labor Party was more shocked, shell-shocked. No celebrations for its candidate, Sharon last night, just hugs and kisses of sympathy. And today, Simon Crean had to face the music.
I accept the fact that this has been a defeat, and that's not nice. I don't like that. I don't like losing.
Nor does his party, and talk about how long he can survive as leader is now rife. Labor frontbencher Stephen Martin held Cunningham, based on the industrial city of Wollongong, by a 10% margin at last year's federal poll. But his resignation caused resentment in the electorate, internal brawling in the local ALP alienated voters, and the by-election turned into a disaster for the party.
The message is that people want us to reform ourselves. They don't want us to be disunited.
But the message also is that voters are just not buying Mr Crean. He himself said the by-election was a test of his leadership, and the result shows he flunked the test. Greens leader, Senator Bob Brown, saw another lesson.
People don't want Australians being sent to a Bush-led war in Iraq.
Labor's primary vote dropped by 6%. After preferences, with no Liberal in the field of 13, Labor got less than 48%, the Greens just over 52%. Laurie Oakes, National 9 News.
Federal opposition leader Simon Crean says his leadership is secure, even though Labor suffered an embarrassing defeat in this weekend's Cunningham by-election. The Greens won their first seat in the House of Representatives. In doing so, they booted Labor out of the electorate it's held for more than half a century.
The Greens had good vibes about the Illawarra throughout the campaign. Last night, it was time to celebrate.
The figures that have gone up on the board tonight are a green dream.
They were enough to make Michael Organ the party's first member of the House of Representatives, with a two-party preferred vote of 52%. Bob Brown now leads a triumvirate of Greens.
So we're looking forward to get stuck into John Howard, and we're looking...
On the other side of town, Labor was mourning the loss of a 52-year stranglehold in Cunningham, despite pulling out all stops for candidate Sharon Bird. Simon Crean wasn't there to survey the damage, but he's feeling it.
I accept my responsibility as leader for this result. I'm not trying to avoid that.
The union-backed independent, whose preferences helped put the Greens over the line, says the ALP machine deserved a major shake.
They have ignored us, they have treated us with contempt for many, many years.
If Labor needed further proof that this electorate has turned, the primary vote tells the story. It dropped several points in last November's federal election, and yesterday it dived again, down to 38%.
I think there's a fairly strong message, and that is that the Australian people don't want to see Australians being sent to a war in Iraq.
Today, the Greens' celebrations were muted, commemorating the Bali bombing with a wreath in the ocean. Emma Griffiths, ABC News, Wollongong.
The Greens are celebrating tonight after reshaping Australia's political landscape. They've won the South Coast seat of Cunningham, thumping Labor and putting new pressure on Simon Crean.
The loss of a heartland seat like Cunningham is a humiliation for Labor and its federal leader, Simon Crean. ALP candidate Sharon Bird was soundly beaten, while the Greens' Michael Organ delivered his party its first ever seat in the House of Representatives.
The figures that have gone up on the board tonight are a green dream.
Labor has held the seat since 1949 and was forced to a by-election when local member Stephen Martin quit less than a year after the last federal poll. Divisions within the ALP and resentment about the selection of a candidate killed its chance of hanging on. Green Senator Bob Brown says voters are giving up on major parties.
It's a message to both the big parties that their style, they look too much alike. They've lost the touch with the grassroots Australians.
Simon Crean has been humbled by the outcome.
As federal leader, I have to accept my responsibility as the leader of the Labor Party for the fact that we lost it. And I don't seek to avoid that.
Mr Crean says his party is already reforming itself and he expects his colleagues to stand behind him.
My party will support me because they want to win.
Labor's not the only party disappointed with the Cunningham result. The vote for the Democrats collapsed, its candidate polling less than the Christian Democrats, One Nation and several independents. In Canberra, Jeff Parry, 7 News.
I'm a local. I was born and bred in the Illawarra. Now I'm in Parliament, I'm a voice for our community. Unlike the ALP or the Liberals, I opposed increases in the costs of medicines. I also voted against the Free Trade Agreement to protect local jobs. I've spoken up for workers' rights, students, migrants and the unemployed. This Saturday, I simply ask for your support so I can keep working for our community.
Vote 1 and re-elect Michael Organ this Saturday. He's our community voice.
Authorised by Michael Organ for the Greens, Wollongong. Until I was elected in 2002, Cunningham had only ever been held by a major party. We were taken for granted by Labor and ignored by the Liberals. Now the government has to listen to what we want. Who can you trust to protect our escarpment coastline? Who argued against TAFE and university fees? Who opposed increasing the costs of medicines? Was it the ALP or Liberals? No, I did. Don't let them take the Illawarra for granted again.
Vote 1 and re-elect Michael Organ this Saturday. He's our community voice.
Authorised by Michael Organ for the Greens, Wollongong.
How can John Howard and the Labor Party both offer tax cuts whilst our public schools and hospitals are hanging by a thread? Let's increase the funding for our public services instead of cutting taxes. Vote 1 the Greens. There is an alternative.
Authorised by Jeff Ash for the Greens, Sydney. This man works for a large corporation, so he can't show his face on TV. The fact that he's preparing donations for political parties may prompt you to ask, which party refuses to accept donations from big business? The Greens. There is an alternative.
Authorised by Jeff Ash for the Greens, Sydney.
Simon here works for a large corporation, so he can't show his face on TV. Hi, Simon. The fact that he's preparing donations for political parties may prompt you to ask, will a political party that receives so much money from Simon really be working for us or for Simon? All too often our governments are doing whatever Simon says. So which party refuses to accept donations from big business? The Greens. There is an alternative.
Authorised by Jeff Ash for the Greens, Sydney.